And so something a little different this year is our scoring rubric. So returning PC members will explain what all of this means, and for new members as well. So Beth, would you like to explain this slide?
Yeah, Beth and Colleen and I can, Colleen can jump in here if she wants to add anything as well. So this rubric should look very similar to us because we use something like it for the featured symposia. Working with the peer mentors, we turned that rubric over into an abstract review rubric as well. And the reason for this is we really want to use the range and scoring of abstracts this year. What we've found in past years is that there was, depending on the topic that people had abstracts in, we would get some abstracts that scored really tight, 8s, 9s, 10s, and then we'd have other topics that were 11s and 12s. And we were programming 11 and 12s for platforms where abstracts that had scored like 8s or 9s were not getting platforms. So we're hoping that by stretching out the scoring rubric a little bit more, we can have a bit more refinement in our scoring, so it'll be a little bit easier to see how we can program platforms versus posters. So the rubric, as you'll see, has the different details, topic, organization, and content, and then a kind of an overall review of the abstract. So you'll see in here, because people always ask us, what do we do with abstracts that have published results in them? If you look in the rubric under the score 5 and 6, you'll see that we're trying to deal with previously published data. So that's one way we're trying to make this a little bit easier to score these abstracts. And then we also get comments about what happens if an abstract reads like it's commercialized or it's an advertisement. We have a category for that as well. So we're trying to make it pretty easy to stratify these abstracts into different categories so that when we go to program in July, Colleen and I are hoping that it'll be a little bit easier for us to do this. So Nikki has put in here where we expect the amount of abstracts to fall. That it'll play out the way that it does, but just score, you and your reviewers score the best that you can according to this rubric. We want to also make sure that there's more consistency in scoring between our different topical groups. So we're hoping that this rubric will help. So Ryan, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I think it's great to sort of spell out the rubric. Any chances this information is going to be shared with the community of people submitting their abstracts so they know sort of what we're looking for and how to improve their abstract to make sure they're making the best point they can?
I think that would be a great idea. I mean, I have no problem with that. If Alyssa, Nikki, what do you think about that?
As a former teacher, I think sharing the rubric with people who have to apply, that it's going to be applied to, is always a good thing. I don't know that we've done that in the past, but it was pretty simple in the past. This is a lot more built out than we have had previously. So I'm happy to look into that, but I don't see why we couldn't.
Yep. And my thought, Ryan, is because the rubric, the feature symposia rubric, was new for this year, and I think it worked out pretty well. We'll try the rubric also for the abstracts, and hopefully it'll make things a little bit easier than has in the past. And then hopefully, when Colleen comes on board as the chair next year, she can think about making the rubrics for both the feature symposia and for the abstracts available to the community, because I think that's a great idea.
Great.
Colleen, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I think I like the idea of sharing it as well. So no additional thoughts.
Yep. Great. Jing.
Yeah, so you mentioned about what about the published results? When I read the rubric, it's all mentioned like unpublished results for all the scores. If we see the published results in the abstract, like what kind of score we should give?
So if you look underneath, go over to right where Nikki has the arrow. If you look down here, results are published. So that's where you would start scoring in that range.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. I got it. I see.
Yep, absolutely. That's a good question.
Did you want to clarify something here too in 5 or 6? And Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, because we say results are published, but then we also say unpublished results.
Right.
it's kind of like either the results are published or they are unpublished, but they're immature, less significant. And that can fall into both areas here for the poster scoring.
Yep. That's right. Yeah, you said that exactly right, Nikki.
Okay.
So we may have different types of abstracts, something that has already been published, was published 6-9 months ago, or we have some results that are just a little too preliminary, and they may not, they may score in the 5 or 6 range, and that may be a poster and might not make it to a platform. Cassie?
Yeah, just one thought that came to mind. I could envision potential reviewers asking if this means they're supposed to try to figure out if this abstract has been published before because it's making that distinguishment there, right? Like, so are we expecting our reviewers to do this sort of searching to figure out if it's published, or is that just sort of if you already know this work is published because it's a field that you're in and then you can score it that way?
You will, sorry, I can clarify that just from what you'll be able to see within the review site. We do ask submitters to identify if the work is previously published by the submission deadline of June 5th, whether it's published in like a journal or will be presented at another conference. I know that sometimes at the July meeting, we search and we find things that maybe weren't necessarily disclosed. But we are expecting reviewers and PC members to go based off of what the submitters are self-selecting, at least for scoring, and you'll have access to view that in the scoring site itself.
And Nikki, actually, Stephen raised a really good point. And I think after this meeting, I want to update the rubric real quick. I think we should clarify that they'll be published in a journal. Preprints do not fall underneath that. So thank you for bringing that up, Stephen. That's a great point. Fernando, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. No, I think going back to the issue of like published results, sometimes I've seen like a few abstracts that were like a mixture of like published results and then unpublished results that were exciting, but I thought, well, but they put published data here. So I was inclined to really, send it to the poster section, but I don't know. Yeah. So I guess if we see anything published, I'm not talking about like preprints, I think that probably should get like a 5 to 6 based on this rubric.
Yep, that's what we're thinking. Unless, I mean, I guess you do have some flexibility here. If they literally have done a completely new, here's what we published and now we have like this tons more of new data, I mean, that's unpublished, then you may be able to look a little bit more in the 4 range. But if literally we've seen this before, where abstracts come in and they're essentially recapitulating what they've published, and I think we need to distinguish that in some way. So that's how we were kind of thinking about it with the rubric. This is an experiment, and the feedback that we get from this from you all will be really helpful because we can refine the rubric, in future years. So let's try it this way, and then don't hesitate to give me or Colleen feedback so that we can, always enhance it. It's always a great goal to have. Moving towards perfection, right?
And obviously if questions come up as you begin this phase, like feel free to email us as staff, Beth and Colleen, like we have a list of support on a slide at the end with emails you can reach out to. We're happy to help. And then there's a way to conflict out of scoring. It will be a blind review process, but if you're familiar with the work, it's someone in your lab, whatnot, or somewhere that you work, you'll want to conflict out, and we'll recirculate that conflict of interest policy before we get started on this phase as well.